Hey guys, tonight we begin with the tragic and often overlooked lives of the lovers of Zeus, the infamous king of the gods, wielder of thunder, and let's be honest, ancient Greece's most problematic boyfriend. You're about to hear stories that didn't make it into Disney movies, tales where divine power meets mortal vulnerability, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive emotionally intact if you think too hard about the power dynamics here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. You're Europa, a Phoenician princess around the 15th century BCE, and your biggest worry should be which tunic makes your eyes sparkle, or whether the palace servants remembered to perfume your bathwater with rose petals. Instead, you're about to become the unwitting star of a story that will literally give its name to an entire continent. Though historians still argue whether the myth inspired the geographical term or vice versa. The morning starts like any other in the coastal kingdom of Phoenicia, present-day Lebanon, for those keeping track. The Mediterranean sun climbs lazily over limestone cliffs, casting everything in that golden honey light that makes ancient civilizations look so appealing in movies. You can almost smell the salt air mixing with frankincense from the nearby temples, where priests are probably muttering prayers to gods who, unbeknownst to them, are about to cause some serious drama. Europa never asked to be part of a myth. She was just a princess doing princess things, picking flowers by the sea with her gaggle of attendants, probably complaining about the heat or discussing whatever passed for celebrity gossip in Bronze Age Phoenicia. The day was warm, the sky deceptively harmless, with no omens or warnings dancing in the clouds. Just sunlight glinting off the waves and the musical laughter of young women echoing across the meadows. Here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean deeply uncomfortable if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Zeus, the king of the gods and serial shapeshifter extraordinaire, had been watching Europa from Mount Olympus. Now, ancient sources describe Zeus as many things: powerful, wise, the ultimate authority figure. But they tend to gloss over his rather concerning habit of, well, let's call it persistent romantic pursuit of mortal women who definitely didn't sign up for divine attention. The plan Zeus concocted would make modern stalkers take notes. Instead of appearing in his true form, because apparently even gods understand that rolling up as a 9-foot-tall lightning-wielding deity might be a bit much, he decided to go with the animal approach. Specifically, a bull. Not just any bull, mind you, but the most beautiful bull that ever existed, gleaming white as fresh snow, with horns shaped like a perfect crescent moon, and eyes that seemed far too intelligent for any ordinary beast. This transformation tells us something fascinating about ancient Mediterranean cultures and their relationship with cattle. Bulls were symbols of power, fertility, and divine strength across multiple civilizations, from the sacred bulls of Egypt to the bull-leaping ceremonies of Minoan Crete. Zeus choosing this form wasn't random. It was psychological warfare disguised as pastoral beauty. Europa spots this magnificent creature approaching the flower-dotted meadow where she and her friends are having what amounts to an ancient beach day. The bull doesn't charge or threaten. Instead, it approaches with an almost supernatural gentleness, kneeling before her like some kind of four-legged courtier. The other girls probably giggle and point, but Europa feels drawn to this creature in a way that defies rational explanation. She reaches out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the silky, white fur of its neck. The bull nuzzles her hand with what seems like genuine affection, and Europa finds herself laughing, that pure, unguarded sound of someone who has no idea their life is about to change forever. The creature seems so docile, so perfectly harmless, that when it settles down beside her, she doesn't think twice about climbing onto its broad back. This is the moment everything shifts. The bull that was Zeus doesn't gradually reveal its true nature. It explodes into action. 1 second, Europa is sitting prettily on what she assumes is a tame animal, The next, she's clinging desperately to its neck as it charges toward the sea at supernatural speed. Her laughter transforms into screams of confusion and terror as the shoreline rushes toward them. But Zeus, as bull, doesn't stop at the water's edge. No, this divine creature plunges directly into the Mediterranean, and suddenly Europa realizes she's not dealing with any earthly animal. The bull swims with impossible grace and speed, carrying her farther and farther from the Phoenician coast as her attendants shriek helplessly from the rapidly disappearing shore. Historians still argue whether this myth represents some kind of ancient memory of Bronze Age maritime kidnapping or migration patterns. But from Europa's perspective, none of that academic speculation matters. She's alone on the open sea, clinging to a creature that's clearly supernatural, watching her home disappear beyond the horizon. The waves rise around you like liquid mountains, and you realize with growing horror that this isn't just some unusually athletic bull. This is something else entirely. The creature beneath you moves through the water with the confidence of a sea god, never faltering, never tiring, while you grip its neck so tightly your knuckles have gone white as bone. The salt spray stings your eyes, mixing with tears you didn't realize you were crying. Your attendants' voices have long since faded into the distance, swallowed by the endless blue that stretches in every direction. The Phoenician coast, with its familiar olive groves and limestone terraces, has become nothing more than a smudge on the horizon. You've never been this far from home, never been anywhere without guards and servants, and the comfortable certainty of palace walls around you. The bull, and you're starting to suspect it's not really a bull at all, seems to glide effortlessly across the Mediterranean swells. Ancient mariners would tell you that these waters could be treacherous, filled with sudden storms and hidden rocks that could crush a ship's hull like an eggshell. But your mysterious mount navigates them as if following some invisible highway known only to itself. As the hours pass, you notice things that make your skin crawl with unease. The creature's breathing never becomes labored, despite swimming distances that would exhaust even the strongest horse. Its coat remains impossibly dry and gleaming, as if the seawater simply refuses to cling to it. Most disturbing of all, you catch glimpses of its reflection in the waves. Sometimes it looks like a bull, but occasionally, just for a heartbeat, you swear you see the outline of something else entirely. Historians still argue whether the Europa myth represents ancient memories of Minoan sea raids or peaceful cultural exchange. But right now, academic theories are the furthest thing from your mind. You're living through what feels like a waking nightmare, carried off by a creature that defies every natural law you've ever known. The sun climbs higher, beating down on your unprotected head with merciless intensity. Your throat feels like sandpaper, and your lips are already beginning to crack from the salt air. The practical side of your mind, the part trained by palace tutors in geography and logistics, calculates that you must be dozens of miles from shore by now, farther than any rescue party could possibly follow. But rescue assumes someone knows where you've gone, and the sheer impossibility of your situation makes you wonder if anyone would even believe your attendant's account. The princess was carried off by a magical bull that walked on water. Even in an age where people regularly sacrifice to sea gods and consult oracles, that story might strain credibility. The bull turns its massive head slightly, and you catch sight of one enormous eye regarding you with what looks disturbingly like intelligence. Not the simple awareness of an animal, but something deeper, more calculating. There's recognition there, and perhaps even amusement, as if this creature knows exactly how terrified and confused you are. Ancient sources describe various sea creatures that aided Zeus in his transformations, dolphins that could carry messages, fish that swam in perfect formations to guide his path. As if summoned by some invisible signal, you begin to notice that you're not alone on this impossible journey. Dolphins surface nearby, their sleek bodies arcing through the waves in what looks almost like an honor guard. Schools of fish create silvery trails just beneath the surface, as if the entire ocean has been choreographed for this moment. The realization hits you like a physical blow. This isn't just a kidnapping, it's a procession. Whatever this creature really is, it commands the respect and obedience of every living thing in these waters. You're not just the victim of some random monster. You're being transported with all the ceremony due to... what? A queen? A queen? A sacrifice? The thought makes your stomach clench with fresh terror. The Mediterranean sun reaches its zenith, turning the water into a mirror of molten silver that hurts to look at directly. You've been traveling for what feels like hours now, and despite the supernatural nature of your mount, your very human body is beginning to rebel. Your muscles ache from gripping so tightly, your skin burns from sun and salt, and a nauseating mixture of fear and seasickness churns in your empty stomach. Just when you think you might finally lose consciousness and tumble into the wine-dark sea, as Homer would later poetically describe these very waters, you spot something on the horizon. An island, rising from the waves like a promise of solid ground. But even as relief floods through you, a colder understanding follows close behind. Your mysterious captor has been heading somewhere specific all along. This wasn't a random act of divine madness. It was a carefully planned abduction with a predetermined destination. The bull's pace doesn't slacken as the island grows larger, revealing beaches of white sand and hills covered in what looks like olive trees. It's beautiful, undeniably, but beauty in the hands of something this powerful feels more like a trap than a gift. The island of Crete materializes before you like something from a fever dream. All white cliffs and impossible blue-green waters that would be breathtaking under different circumstances. Your bull captor doesn't slow as it approaches the shore. If anything, it seems to gain speed, as if eager to complete whatever cosmic plan has been set in motion. The waves part around you with supernatural precision, creating a pathway of calm water that extends directly to the beach. You can feel the creature's powerful muscles bunching beneath you as it prepares to make landfall, and for one wild moment you consider throwing yourself into the sea rather than discovering what awaits you on solid ground. But the practical princess in you, the part trained since childhood in diplomacy and survival, recognizes that drowning in the Mediterranean probably isn't going to improve your situation. The bull's hooves touch sand with barely a splash, and suddenly you're on a beach more perfect than any artist could imagine. The sand is fine as powdered marble, warm between your toes as you slide down from the creature's back on unsteady legs. Your knees nearly buckle after hours of gripping its broad shoulders, and you have to catch yourself against its flank to avoid collapsing entirely. That's when everything changes. The air around the bull begins to shimmer like heat waves rising from sun-baked stone, and you scramble backward as the creature's form starts to shift and blur. This isn't the gradual transformation you might expect from a fairy tale. It's violent, overwhelming, reality-bending in ways that make your eyes water and your mind rebel against what it's witnessing. Where moments before stood a magnificent white bull, now a man emerges from the dissipating golden light. Not just any man, but someone whose very presence seems to make the air itself hold its breath. He's tall, powerfully built, with the kind of classical features that sculptors spend lifetimes trying to capture in marble. His hair is dark as a storm cloud, his eyes the deep blue-gray of the sea during a tempest, and when he looks at you, you feel like a mouse being studied by a particularly intelligent cat. This is Zeus in his true form, though true might be a relative term for a god who's worn more shapes than a theater company's costume collection. Ancient sources describe him as irresistibly beautiful when he chose to be, with a voice that could command thunder and a smile that could make mortals forget their own names. Unfortunately for you, you're experiencing this divine charisma firsthand, and it's absolutely terrifying. Europa, he says, and your name in his mouth sounds like a prayer and a claim of ownership all at once. His voice carries the kind of authority that makes mountains listen and seas obey, but there's something else there too. A warmth that feels almost genuine, as if he actually cares about your comfort and well-being. It's probably the most dangerous thing about him. You want to run, to scream, to demand explanations, but something about his presence roots you to the spot. This is divine power in its purest form, the kind of overwhelming force that ancient peoples built temples to appease and modern scholars struggle to understand. Historians still argue whether Zeus represents the memory of some ancient sky god cult or a personification of natural forces, but academic debates seem rather pointless when you're face to face with the reality. "You're afraid," Zeus observes, and there's something that might be sympathy in his voice. "That's understandable. Mortals rarely adjust quickly to divine attention." He takes a step closer, and you notice that his feet don't quite seem to leave prints in the sand, as if he's not entirely bound by the same physical laws that govern your existence. The rational part of your mind catalogs everything you've been taught about dealing with gods. Be respectful but not servile. Never look directly at their true forms. Always remember that divine favor can turn to wrath faster than lightning strikes. Unfortunately, most of that advice assumes you have some choice in the encounter, and your current situation has moved well beyond the realm of voluntary religious experience. "Why?" you manage to whisper, proud that your voice doesn't crack entirely. "Why me?" Zeus's smile could have launched 1,000 ships or ended a dozen wars. "Because you're beautiful, yes, but more than that, you're interesting. Most mortals bore me within minutes, but you..." He pauses, as if considering how much truth to reveal. "You have the strength to mother heroes and the wisdom to found dynasties. Your children will reshape the world." The casual mention of children makes your blood run cold. Ancient marriage customs varied wildly across the Mediterranean, but divine abduction definitely wasn't covered in your princess training. The implications of his words settle over you like a lead blanket. This isn't a temporary divine visitation or a test of your piety. This is permanent, life-altering, future-defining, in ways that have nothing to do with your own desires or choices. The silence stretches between you and the god like a taut bowstring, filled with unspoken implications that make your stomach twist with dread. Zeus seems to be waiting for some kind of response. But what exactly does one say to the king of the gods when he's just announced his intention to father your children? "Thank you, but I'd prefer to keep my options open." Doesn't seem like it would go over well with someone who commands lightning. You notice that the beach around you has taken on an otherworldly quality. The colors are too vivid, the air too still, as if reality itself is holding its breath in the presence of divine power. Even the waves seem to lap at the shore more gently, as though the sea itself is afraid to make too much noise. It's beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers are beautiful, stunning and deadly in equal measure. "I know this isn't what you planned for your life," Zeus continues, his voice carrying that dangerous combination of gentleness and absolute authority. "Mortal princesses usually expect to marry neighboring kings, form political alliances, spend their days managing households and bearing heirs to secure treaties." He gestures to the pristine landscape around you. "I'm offering something rather different." Different is certainly one way to put it. Ancient Mediterranean marriage customs typically involved extensive negotiations between families, dowries, ceremonial exchanges that could take months to arrange properly. What Zeus is describing sounds less like marriage and more like, well, divine acquisition. The kind of transaction where one party gets everything they want and the other party gets to hope they survive the experience. You find your voice again, though it comes out smaller than you'd like. "And if I refuse?" The question hangs in the air like incense smoke, and for a moment you see something flicker across Zeus's perfect features. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. It occurs to you that this might be the first time in centuries that anyone has suggested he might not get exactly what he wants exactly when he wants it. "Refuse?" He repeats the word as if it's in a foreign language. "Europa, you're thinking like a mortal, like someone who still believes she has the luxury of choice." His expression isn't cruel, but there's a certainty there that's somehow worse than cruelty. You've already been chosen. The question isn't whether this will happen, it's whether you'll find a way to make peace with it. The casual dismissal of your agency hits you like a physical blow. This is what absolute power looks like, you realize. Not raging tyranny or dramatic threats, but the simple, unshakable belief that resistance is impossible because it's never been successful before. Zeus isn't evil in the way mortals understand evil. He's something far more dangerous. A being so powerful that other people's desires simply don't register as real to him. Ancient sources describe Zeus as the ultimate patriarch, the father figure who rules through wisdom and strength. But they tend to skip over moments like this, when wisdom and strength are just prettier names for, I'm bigger than you, so I get what I want. Historians still argue whether the Zeus myths reflect actual Bronze Age power structures, or represent later Greek attempts to justify their own patriarchal systems. But right now, you're less concerned with academic interpretation than with immediate survival. You look out at the endless blue of the Mediterranean, calculating distances and possibilities. Could you somehow signal a passing ship? Hide in the island's interior until rescue arrives? The thoughts feel pathetic even as they form. You're dealing with a god who just crossed the sea in the form of a bull, and you're planning to outwit him with basic geography? I see you thinking, Zeus observes, and there's genuine fondness in his voice now, as if your futile planning is adorable rather than desperate. That's exactly what I found so intriguing about you. Most mortals either grovel immediately or waste time with hysterics. You're trying to solve the problem. The compliment feels like another trap. Part of you wants to take pride in his approval. This is the king of the gods recognizing your intelligence, but a larger part recognizes the patronizing undertone. You're a clever pet who's learned an amusing trick, not an equal worthy of actual consideration. The sun is beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that would be romantic under any other circumstances. The beauty of it all feels like mockery. Here you are, experiencing what might be the most traumatic day of your life, and the universe insists on providing a spectacular sunset as backdrop. There will be compensations, Zeus says, following your gaze to the painted sky. Power, influence, immortality for your name, if not your body. Your children will become kings and heroes. Your story will be told for thousands of years. The promises Zeus offers sound like someone describing a feast to a starving person while refusing to let them eat. Power, influence, immortality of name, all very impressive in theory, but you can't help noticing that none of these compensations involve actually asking what you might want for yourself. It's the divine equivalent of being told you should feel grateful for winning a lottery you never entered. As the Cretan sunset deepens into true evening, you realize that your old life, the one where you were Princess Europa of Phoenicia, daughter of King Agenor, with a future mapped out in political marriages and diplomatic ceremonies, ended the moment you climbed onto that white bull's back. That version of yourself is as distant now as the Phoenician coastline, and probably just as impossible to reclaim. What happens now, you ask, proud that your voice has steadied somewhat. If you're going to be trapped in a myth, you might as well try to understand the plot. Zeus's smile carries the warmth of summer lightning, beautiful, powerful, and potentially deadly. Now you become the mother of kings. He gestures toward the interior of the island, where you can make out the shadows of what looks like a palace gleaming white against the darkening hills. Crete will be your kingdom, Europa, not as a consolation prize, but as your domain. The palace he's indicating is clearly no mortal construction. Even in the gathering darkness, it seems to glow with its own soft light, as if the marble itself has absorbed sunshine and is now releasing it slowly into the night. Ancient Minoan architecture was renowned for its sophistication, with complex drainage systems and multi-story buildings that wouldn't look out of place in a modern city. But this structure suggests something beyond even their advanced engineering. You find yourself walking toward it, not because Zeus compels you, though you suspect he could if he wanted to, but because the alternative is standing on this beach forever, and even divine abduction has to move forward eventually. Your feet sink into sand that feels warm despite the cooling air, and you notice that flowers seem to bloom in your footsteps, as if the earth itself is celebrating your presence. The children, you say quietly, not quite able to frame it as a question. The topic feels too enormous, too life-altering to approach directly, but it hangs between you like a storm cloud. 3 sons, Zeus replies with the casual certainty of someone consulting a calendar. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Sarpedon. Each will become a king. Each will be remembered long after their bones have crumbled to dust. He pauses, studying your expression with those impossibly blue eyes. they'll be extraordinary, Europa. Not just because they're half divine, but because they're yours. The way he says it makes you suspect this is Zeus's version of a compliment, but it still feels like hearing your future read by a fortune teller you never consulted. Historians still argue whether these mythical sons of Zeus represent actual Bronze Age rulers or later Greek attempts to justify various dynastic claims. But from your perspective, the academic debate misses the point entirely. These aren't historical figures or political symbols. They're your children, people you'll love and worry about and try to protect in a world where their father is literally the king of the gods. As you approach the impossible palace, you catch glimpses of movement in the shadows, servants perhaps, or spirits, or something in between. The building itself seems to breathe with quiet life, walls that pulse gently like a heartbeat, windows that glow with warm golden light that has nothing to do with oil lamps or torches. This is architecture powered by divine will rather than human engineering. Will I see my family again? The question escapes before you can stop it, and you immediately regret showing that vulnerability. Zeus's expression softens in a way that might be genuine sympathy. Your father will search for you, of course. He'll send ships across the Mediterranean, offer rewards, consult every oracle from here to Egypt. But Europa, the Phoenician princess, is gone, disappeared into legend. What remains is Europa of Crete, mother of heroes, the woman whose name will grace an entire continent. The casual cruelty of it takes your breath away. He's not lying or trying to spare your feelings. He's simply explaining that your previous existence has been efficiently erased, like a scribe smoothing over a wax tablet to write something new. Your parents will mourn a daughter who might as well be dead, while you'll live on as someone else entirely. Ancient sources describe Zeus as a protector of hospitality and family bonds, but apparently those divine principles have some rather significant loopholes when it comes to his own desires. The irony would be funny if it weren't happening to you. Years pass on Crete like pages turning in a book you never asked to read, each chapter bringing new wonders and fresh sorrows in equal measure. You do indeed become the mother of kings. Minos emerges first, imperious and clever even as a child, followed by Rhadamanthus with his unsettling gift for seeing through lies, and finally Sarpedon, whose laughter could charm birds from trees, and whose temper could level small buildings when his divine heritage asserted itself. They're extraordinary children, just as Zeus promised, but extraordinary children come with extraordinary problems. When Minos throws a tantrum at age 5, the palace walls actually crack from the force of his rage. Rhadamanthus has an unfortunate tendency to announce uncomfortable truths at precisely the wrong moments, as if he inherited some diluted version of prophetic sight along with his father's jawline. And Sarpedon, well, let's just say that when a half-divine child decides he wants to fly, finding a way to explain to him why that's inadvisable becomes a full-time occupation. The palace Zeus provided is everything he claimed it would be. Impossibly beautiful, eternally comfortable, staffed by servants who might be spirits or might be something else entirely, depending on how the light hits them. The walls shift color with your moods, the gardens bloom with flowers that shouldn't exist in the same season, and the view from your chambers encompasses an ocean that seems to stretch into infinity. It's the kind of place that would drive poets to madness trying to describe it adequately. But here's the thing about gilded cages that mythology doesn't mention. They're still cages, regardless of how expensive the gilding is. You rule Crete, yes, but you rule it as Europa the legend, rather than Europa the person. And the distinction matters more than you expected. Every decision you make becomes part of some grand narrative that will echo through history. Every choice weighted with symbolic meaning that has nothing to do with your actual intentions. Ancient Minoan civilization was reaching its height during this period, with elaborate palaces at Knossos and sophisticated trade networks spanning the Mediterranean. But your Crete exists slightly outside normal history. Your subjects worship you as a goddess queen, your sons are destined for greatness, your name will indeed be attached to an entire continent. And somehow, despite all this cosmic significance, you find yourself missing the simple pleasure of picking flowers by a Phoenician beach without changing the fate of nations. Zeus visits, of course. Not regularly. Gods apparently have busy schedules, but often enough to remind you that your extraordinary life exists entirely at his discretion. He's unfailingly charming during these visits, bringing gifts that mortal craftsmen couldn't dream of creating, and stories of Olympian politics that would fascinate anyone interested in divine soap opera. He asks about the children, praises your governance of the island, and generally behaves like the kind of husband who might actually deserve the devotion of someone like you. The problem is that you can never quite forget how this relationship began, no matter how comfortable your current circumstances. Every kindness feels like payment for services rendered, every gift like compensation for something taken without permission. Zeus may genuinely care for you. The emotional landscape of gods is notoriously difficult for mortals to navigate, but that care exists within a framework where your consent was never actually required. Historians still argue whether the Europa myth represents ancient memories of cultural exchange between Near Eastern and Greek civilizations, but living inside the myth gives you a different perspective entirely. You're not a symbol of cross-cultural fertilization or a metaphor for colonial expansion. You're a woman who got kidnapped and made the best of an impossible situation, which feels like a rather different story than the one the scholars prefer to tell. Your sons grow into the kings, Zeus predicted, each ruling their own portion of the expanding Minoan sphere. Minos becomes famous for his justice and his labyrinth, Rhadamanthus for his wisdom and his ability to judge the dead, Sarpedon for his prowess in battle and his tragic destiny at Troy. They're good men, despite their divine heritage and the unusual circumstances of their upbringing. And you take pride in that, even as you worry about the prices they'll pay for their extraordinary births. But late at night, when the palace sleeps and the only sound is waves against the Cretan shore, you sometimes find yourself standing on your balcony and looking north toward the Phoenician coast you'll never see again. The memories of home fade like watercolors in rain, but they never disappear entirely. Sometimes you catch yourself speaking to your sons in Phoenician before remembering they were born into Greek tongues and divine destinies. Sometimes you dream of your father's voice calling your name across palace corridors that no longer exist, at least not for you. King Agenor did search, just as Zeus predicted, sent ships to every island, consulted every oracle, even commissioned expeditions to the edges of the known world. But Europa, the Phoenician princess, had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed at all. The cruel mathematics of divine intervention meant that while you gained immortal fame, your family lost a daughter forever. Ancient sources suggest Agenor never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, right up until the day he died with your name on his lips. Your brothers searched too. Cadmus traveled as far as Boeotia before giving up and founding Thebes instead, while Phoenix gave his name to the Phoenician people and went on living with a sister-shaped hole in his heart. These are the costs that never make it into the heroic versions of the story. Bards sing about Europa the queen, mother of kings, the woman whose beauty caught the eye of Zeus himself. They don't mention Europa, the daughter, whose disappearance broke her father's heart and sent her brothers wandering the Mediterranean like ghosts, looking for something they'd never find. Your sons know fragments of this history. You've told them about their mortal grandfather, about the kingdom across the sea where their mother was born, but it feels like describing a dream to people who've never slept. Their world is Crete and divine heritage and destinies written in starlight, while yours contains echoes of a simpler time when the biggest decision you faced was which flowers to pick for your hair. As the decades pass, you watch your extraordinary children grow into their extraordinary fates. Minos becomes the legendary king whose justice was so perfect that after death, Zeus appointed him as one of the judges of the underworld. His famous labyrinth beneath the palace becomes both wonder and terror, housing the Minotaur, born from his wife's cursed passion. Because apparently even divine bloodlines can't protect you from the kind of family drama that would make modern soap operas look restrained. Rhadamanthus earns such a reputation for fairness and wisdom that he too receives a post-mortem judicial appointment, spending eternity deciding the fates of souls who lived ambiguous lives. Ancient sources describe him as incapable of lying or being deceived, which must have made his childhood dinner conversations absolutely exhausting. Imagine trying to keep normal parental secrets from a son who could see through every white lie and diplomatic evasion. And Sarpedon, your youngest, grows into a warrior whose prowess becomes legendary even among heroes. When the Trojan War finally erupts, that great catastrophe that Homer will immortalize in verse, Sarpedon leads the Lycian forces with courage that impresses even gods. But divine heritage, as you've learned, is no protection against the kinds of tragedies that define epic poetry. When Patroclus kills him on the battlefield, Zeus himself weeps tears of blood that fall like rain across the ancient world. You feel that loss like a physical wound, even though you knew it was coming. Prophetic dreams started visiting you months earlier, visions of your youngest son falling beneath bronze spears while his divine father watched from Olympus, bound by fate and cosmic law from interfering. The gods may be powerful, but even they can't rewrite destiny once it's been established. And Sarpedon's fate was woven into the tapestry of the Trojan War from the very beginning. These are the moments when your immortal fame feels more like a curse than a blessing. You're Europa the legendary, mother of kings, the woman whose name graces maps and inspires poets. But you're also just a mother who has to bury her child while knowing that his death serves some greater narrative purpose that you never agreed to participate in. Zeus comforts you during this period with the awkward tenderness of someone who understands loss but has never experienced it the way mortals do. When gods lose something, they can usually just create a replacement or demand satisfaction from whoever caused the problem. When mortals lose something precious, especially something irreplaceable like a child, the wound never quite heals. It just becomes part of the landscape of who you are. The weight of legendary status becomes heavier with each passing year, like armor that grows thicker with every story told about your life. You've become Europa the myth, and myths have their own terrible momentum. They simplify complex truths into digestible narratives, transforming messy human experiences into clean moral lessons that completely miss the point of what actually happened. Bards across the Mediterranean sing songs about the beautiful princess who won the love of Zeus, as if winning accurately describes what transpired on that Phoenician beach so many years ago. They describe your abduction as a romance, your captivity as queenship, your loss of choice as divine favor. The story they tell isn't exactly false, but it's not exactly true either. It's the version that makes audiences feel comfortable, the one that suggests cosmic justice and divine wisdom rather than cosmic power and divine selfishness. What disturbs you most is how completely these sanitized versions have replaced the actual events in popular memory. Even on Crete, where people see you daily and know you as a living person rather than a literary character, the mythic version gradually overwrites reality. Your subjects remember Europa the legend more clearly than Europa the woman, as if the flesh and blood person who rules them matters less than the symbolic figure who validates their importance in the grand scheme of things. Ancient historians like Herodotus will eventually try to rationalize myths like yours, suggesting that Zeus was actually a powerful king who used religious authority to justify territorial expansion. But even their attempts at rational explanation miss something essential. Whether Zeus was a god or a king or a metaphor for cultural forces, the fundamental dynamic remains the same. Someone with overwhelming power took something precious from someone without power, and everyone agreed to call it a love story. Your remaining sons, Minos and Rhadamanthus, grow into the kind of rulers that poets celebrate and historians admire. They establish laws, build cities, create institutions that will outlive them by centuries, but sometimes you catch them watching you with expressions that mix love and puzzlement, as if they're trying to reconcile the mythic figure they've inherited as a mother with the actual woman who raised them. They love you, of course. You made sure of that, despite the unusual circumstances of their conception and the divine expectations that shaped their childhoods. But they also understand, in the way that only children of legends can understand, that their mother belongs to history as much as she belongs to them. Every embrace carries the weight of future tellings. every conversation becomes potential material for epic poetry. Zeus still visits, though less frequently now that your sons have achieved their destined greatness and your role in the cosmic narrative has been largely fulfilled. He's aged well. Gods have that advantage, and his manner toward you has evolved from passionate conquest to something that might generously be called affectionate partnership. He asks about your comfort, shares news from Olympus, and generally behaves like a husband who genuinely cares about his wife's well-being. The problem is that you can never entirely trust these demonstrations of divine affection, because you've learned too much about how gods operate. Zeus may genuinely love you, in whatever way beings like him experience love, but that emotion exists within a framework where your desires are interesting, rather than determining. If cosmic necessity required your sacrifice tomorrow, he'd probably feel genuinely sad about it, while ensuring that it happened anyway. This is the loneliness that myths don't mention. The isolation of being cherished by someone whose nature makes genuine equality impossible. Zeus can shower you with gifts, create wonders for your entertainment, even mourn alongside you when tragedy strikes, but he can never quite treat you as an autonomous being whose wishes matter as much as his own. Historians still argue whether the various Zeus and mortal woman stories represent actual religious practices, political allegories, or just popular entertainment. But living inside one of these narratives teaches you something that scholarly analysis misses: the difference between being the subject of a story and being the object of one. Subjects have agency, make choices, shape their own destinies. Objects have things done to them, serve purposes determined by others, exist primarily to advance someone else's plot. You've spent decades trying to reclaim subjecthood within the constraints of your mythic role, and you've achieved a kind of success. Crete prospers under your rule. Your sons became good men despite their extraordinary circumstances. Your name will indeed echo through history. But the original injury, the fundamental violation of your agency, remains unhealed and unhealable. A wound that's become so much a part of you that you wouldn't know who you'd be without it. The irony of immortal fame reveals itself slowly, like a poison that takes years to show symptoms. Your name does indeed spread across the known world, attached to the continent that stretches from the Greek islands to the mysterious lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Cartographers draw maps with Europa, written in elegant script across vast territories. Sailors navigate by reference points that bear your name, and philosophers debate the symbolic significance of your story in their endless quest to understand divine will. But here's what no one mentions about achieving legendary status while still breathing. You get to watch your own story mutate beyond recognition, like seeing your reflection distorted in a funhouse mirror until you barely recognize yourself. Each retelling adds new details, removes inconvenient complexities, and adjusts the emotional tone to suit whatever message the storyteller wants to convey. Some versions transform Zeus into a romantic hero, emphasizing his divine beauty and the honor of being chosen by the king of the gods. Others focus on your supposed willing participation, suggesting that you climbed onto that bull's back with full knowledge of its true nature because you were so enchanted by the prospect of divine love. A few particularly creative bards even give you prophetic dreams that revealed your glorious future, making your abduction into an act of cosmic destiny that you embraced willingly. The scholars are the worst, honestly. They analyze your story for hidden meanings and symbolic significance, while completely ignoring the lived experience it represents. To them, you're not a person who survived trauma and made the best of impossible circumstances. You're a metaphor for cultural exchange, a representation of the sacred marriage between sky and earth, or a personification of the civilizing influence of divine authority. Ancient sources describe you as Europa the wide-eyed, but they never explain whether those wide eyes reflected wonder or terror. Later poets call you Europa the far-wandering, as if your journey across the Mediterranean was a pleasant cruise rather than a kidnapping. The euphemisms pile up like snow, each one adding another layer of distance between the historical reality and the mythic narrative. Your sons understand this dynamic better than most people could, having grown up watching their mother navigate the gap between personal truth and public legend. They've learned to speak carefully about family history, knowing that any casual comment might be preserved by some visiting poet and transformed into canonical detail. Minos develops a particular skill for deflecting questions about his divine heritage, while Rhadamanthus perfects the art of giving technically accurate answers that reveal nothing meaningful. The palace records, kept by scribes who treat every royal pronouncement as potential historical source material, gradually accumulate a sanitized version of your reign that emphasizes justice, wisdom, and divine favor, while carefully omitting any reference to homesickness, loss, or the complex emotions involved in loving children whose very existence reminds you of how they were conceived. Historians still argue whether these ancient records preserve authentic details or represent later mythologizing, but from your perspective, the distinction feels academic. Whether future scholars believe the sanitized version or develop their own theories about what really happened, neither approach captures the actual experience of being you, a real person trapped inside an increasingly elaborate fictional narrative. Zeus, during his infrequent visits, sometimes mentions hearing various versions of your story in different parts of the world. He seems genuinely puzzled by some of the more romantic interpretations, as if he's forgotten the actual circumstances of your first meeting and finds the mythic version more appealing than his own memories. Gods, apparently, are not immune to the tendency to prefer comfortable fiction over inconvenient truth. They're calling it a love story now. He mentions during one such visit, his tone mixing amusement with something that might be embarrassment. Poets in Athens are claiming you begged me to take you away from your boring life as a Phoenician princess. The casual revision of history shouldn't surprise you anymore, but it still stings. Your boring life included family, friends, autonomy, and the simple pleasure of making your own choices about small things like what to wear and where to walk. The fact that divine intervention provided compensation doesn't erase what was lost, but the mythic version requires that loss to be forgotten in order to maintain its inspirational message. You've learned to smile and nod when visiting dignitaries praise your good fortune at catching Zeus's attention, just as you've learned to accept graciously when they compliment your wisdom in accepting divine will so readily. The alternative, explaining the actual complexity of your situation, would only confuse people who need myths to be simpler than reality. The twilight years of legendary figures carry their own peculiar burdens, and you discover that growing old inside a myth is nothing like the normal aging process that ordinary mortals experience. Your hair may silver and your joints may stiffen, but your story remains frozen at that moment on the Phoenician beach when you were young and beautiful and worth kidnapping by the king of the gods. Every new telling refreshes that image, ensuring that Europa the legend will always be a teenage princess rather than a woman who has lived through decades of complex experience. This creates an odd disconnection between your public and private selves that becomes more pronounced with each passing year. Visiting dignitaries arrive expecting to meet the radiant young beauty from the stories, and they struggle to reconcile that expectation with the reality of a woman who has raised 3 extraordinary sons, governed an island kingdom, and accumulated the kind of hard-won wisdom that only comes from surviving impossible circumstances. Your subjects on Crete have grown old alongside you, so they're less jarring in their expectations. But even they sometimes seem surprised when you reference events from your pre-Zeus existence or express opinions that don't align perfectly with the mythic version of your character. Europa the legend is supposed to be grateful, wise, and eternally content with her divine fate. Europa, the person, has bad days, complicated feelings, and occasional moments of wondering what her life might have been like if she'd picked different flowers that morning. The administrative aspects of legendary status become increasingly time-consuming as your fame spreads. Delegations arrive from distant kingdoms seeking your blessing for various enterprises. Young women ask for your guidance on matters of the heart, and scholars request interviews about your experiences with divine beings. Each interaction requires you to perform a careful balancing act between honoring your guests' expectations and maintaining some connection to your actual self. Ancient Mediterranean diplomacy relied heavily on symbolic gestures and mythic associations, so your mere presence at state functions carries weight far beyond your personal opinions or political expertise. When you appear at treaty signings or religious ceremonies, you're not just Europa the Queen, you're a living link to divine authority. A reminder that the gods take active interest in human affairs, and a symbol of the rewards that come to those who accept cosmic will gracefully. But performing symbolic roles for decades takes a toll that the myths don't acknowledge. You become expert at saying the right things, making the appropriate gestures, and projecting the kind of serene dignity that people expect from legendary figures. The skill develops gradually, like a callus forming over repeated irritation, until you can shift into mythic mode almost automatically whenever circumstances require it. Your relationship with Zeus evolves during this period into something that might charitably be called mature partnership, though the fundamental power imbalance never entirely disappears. He's genuinely fond of you. You can see it in the way his expression softens when he arrives for his visits. Hear it in the careful attention he pays to your accounts of island politics and family news. But his fondness exists within the context of divine nature, which means it's always conditional on cosmic necessity. The arrival of grandchildren, sons and daughters of Minos and Rhadamanthus who carry diluted divine heritage along with your Phoenician features, creates new complications in the ongoing performance of legendary status. These children grow up knowing their grandmother as both a real person and a mythic figure, which produces some wonderfully candid questions about the discrepancies between family stories and public narratives. Grandmother asks Minos' eldest daughter during one particularly memorable family dinner, "Why do the bards say you fell in love with grandfather Zeus when you always look sad when they sing those songs?" The question hangs in the air like incense smoke, carrying implications that extend far beyond childhood curiosity. Your sons exchange glances across the table. They've wondered about the same thing but have never quite found the courage to ask directly. The servants freeze in their duties, suddenly aware that they're witnessing a moment when private truth might collide with public mythology. Historians still argue whether these kinds of family dynamics actually occurred in Bronze Age royal households, or represent later Greek projections about domestic relationships. But from your perspective, such scholarly debates miss the essential point. Children notice everything, especially the gaps between what adults say happened and what they suspect actually occurred. Before Zeus ever laid eyes on Europa, before Oedipus took his first breath, before Apollo's arrows found their mark, another story was unfolding in the marble halls of Olympus, one that would reshape the very nature of divine power and challenge everything the gods thought they knew about wisdom, authority, and the dangerous mathematics of prophecy. You are Zeus, king of the gods, wielder of thunder, overthrower of titans, and despite all your cosmic authority, you're about to make the kind of mistake that proves even divine intelligence has its limitations. The irony would be amusing if it weren't about to produce consequences that will echo through eternity, creating ripples that will touch every corner of the ancient world and beyond. Your first wife isn't Hera, despite what most mortals assume. Before the jealous queen of the gods, before the political marriage that would define Olympian domestic policy for millennia, there was Metis, titaness of wisdom, deep thought, and the kind of cunning intelligence that helped you win the war against your father Cronus and his generation of cosmic tyrants. Metis isn't beautiful in the conventional sense that drives most divine romances. She doesn't have Aphrodite's golden hair or Hera's regal bearing. What she possesses is something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable, a mind that can outthink problems that would stump other immortals for centuries. When you needed strategies to defeat beings who had ruled the universe since time began, Metis provided them. When you required counsel on matters of cosmic law and divine justice, she offered insights that transformed chaos into order. Ancient sources describe her as wise Metis, but that simple epithet barely captures the reality of her intelligence. She's the kind of person who can see 17 steps ahead in any complex situation, who understands the hidden connections between seemingly unrelated events, who can predict the long-term consequences of decisions that other gods make impulsively. In a realm where most immortals operate on emotion and raw power, she represents something revolutionary. Thought before action. Your courtship, if it can be called that, develops naturally from intellectual partnership into something deeper and more complex. Unlike your later notorious conquests, this relationship begins with mutual respect rather than divine obsession. Metis chooses you as much as you choose her, recognizing that your raw power, combined with her strategic wisdom, could reshape the cosmic order in ways that benefit everyone, gods and mortals alike. The early years of your marriage represent a golden age of divine governance that historians still argue about, though they tend to focus on the political implications rather than the personal dynamics. Together, you establish the fundamental laws that will govern both Olympus and the mortal world. Metis drafts the complex agreements that define each god's sphere of influence, while you provide the authority to enforce them. She designs the intricate systems of divine justice that prevent cosmic chaos, while you serve as the ultimate arbiter when disputes arise. But nothing golden lasts forever, especially when prophecy gets involved. The oracle arrives on a Tuesday, if gods can be said to experience weekdays, delivered by the ancient powers that predate even the Titans. Gaia herself, mother of the earth, speaks the words that will unravel everything you've built with Metis. The son born of wisdom's union with thunder will surpass his father, just as Zeus surpassed Cronus, just as Cronus surpassed Uranus. The prophecy hits like a physical blow, awakening every paranoid instinct you've developed through millennia of cosmic politics. You know the pattern intimately. You lived it when you overthrew your own father, just as he overthrew his father before him. The cycle of divine succession has repeated since the beginning of time, each generation of gods rising up to destroy their predecessors when they grow too powerful or too complacent. Metis tries to reassure you, pointing out that prophecies often contain loopholes or alternative interpretations, that wisdom properly applied might break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. But her rational arguments can't overcome the deep primal fear that success breeds its own destruction, that power inevitably creates the conditions for its own overthrow. Historians still argue whether this prophetic cycle represents actual mythological belief or serves as a metaphor for political succession in ancient societies. But living through it, you discover that the distinction hardly matters. Whether the threat is literal or symbolic, the fear it generates is absolutely real. The weight of prophecy settles over Olympus like storm clouds, heavy with the promise of lightning that hasn't struck yet, but inevitably will. You find yourself watching Metis with new eyes, seeing potential threat where once you saw perfect partnership. Every strategic suggestion she offers now carries the shadow of future betrayal. Every display of her formidable intelligence becomes evidence that your son might indeed inherit enough cunning to outmaneuver even the king of the gods. Sleep becomes impossible. Not that gods technically require it, but the mental equivalent of rest eludes you entirely. You pace the marble corridors of your palace, while thunder rumbles ominously in the distance, as if the sky itself is reflecting your internal turmoil. The other gods begin to notice your distraction, though none dare ask directly what's troubling the supreme ruler of Olympus. Even Hera, who will later become expert at detecting your various anxieties and exploiting them, keeps her distance during this period. Metis, wise as always, recognizes the change in your behavior, but misinterprets its cause. She assumes you're worried about external threats, perhaps the Titans stirring again, or some new cosmic challenge that requires careful planning to overcome. Her attempts to help only make things worse, as each brilliant solution she proposes demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking that could, in the hands of your son, spell your eventual doom. "You seem troubled," she observes one evening, as you stand on your balcony overlooking the mortal world below. "Tell me what concerns you, and we'll find a way through it together. We always have." The casual confidence in her voice, that certainty that any problem can be solved through the application of sufficient intelligence, strikes you as both endearing and terrifying. Of course, she believes you can work through this together. She doesn't yet understand that she is the problem, or rather that the child growing within her represents a threat that no amount of clever planning can neutralize. Ancient sources describe various divine methods for avoiding unwanted prophecies, most of which involve elaborate attempts to circumvent fate through technical loopholes or literal interpretations. But you've studied enough mythological precedents to know that such strategies rarely work as intended. Prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves regardless of precautions, often in precisely the manner that the would-be avoider hoped to prevent. Your father Cronus tried to solve a similar prophetic dilemma by swallowing his children immediately after birth, a strategy that seemed foolproof until your mother Rhea substituted a stone for your infant form and raised you in secret until you were strong enough to force him to regurgitate your siblings. The lesson is clear. Crude applications of power against prophetic destiny tend to create the very conditions that ensure the prophecy's fulfillment. But crude applications of power are pretty much your specialty, and the alternative, accepting that your son will eventually overthrow you, feels impossible to contemplate. You've worked too hard to establish order in the cosmos, invested too much of yourself in creating stable divine governance, to willingly hand it all over to a child who hasn't even been born yet. The solution, when it finally occurs to you, is elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. If the child cannot be born, then the prophecy cannot be fulfilled. And if Metis herself becomes part of you rather than a separate entity capable of bearing your successor, then wisdom serves power rather than potentially threatening it. You rehearse the plan obsessively, considering every possible variable and contingency. The timing has to be perfect. Too early, and Metis might become suspicious. Too late, and the child might be too developed to absorb safely. The method requires precise control over your divine abilities, transforming yourself into something large enough to contain another immortal being without losing your essential nature in the process. Historians still argue whether the Zeus swallows Metis episode represents ancient anxieties about marriage dynamics, political succession, or philosophical questions about the relationship between wisdom and power. But from your perspective, such academic interpretations miss the emotional reality of what you're contemplating. The deliberate destruction of the person you love most in order to preserve your own position. The night before you implement your plan, you stand beside Metis as she sleeps, watching the peaceful expression on her face and trying to memorize every detail. Tomorrow, that face will exist only in your memory, along with her laugh, her brilliant insights, and the way she unconsciously reaches for your hand when she's thinking through particularly complex problems. You tell yourself this is necessary, that cosmic stability requires difficult choices, that a wise ruler must sometimes sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good. But deep down, you know this is just elaborate justification for an act of pure selfishness. You're destroying Metis because you're afraid of losing power, and no amount of philosophical reasoning can transform cowardice into virtue. The morning arrives with the deceptive beauty that often accompanies terrible decisions, all golden sunlight and gentle breezes that seem designed to mock the darkness of what you're about to do. Metis wakes with her usual grace, stretching like a cat in the divine light that filters through the crystal windows of your shared chambers. She smiles at you with the unconscious trust of someone who has never had reason to fear the person lying beside her. "Good morning, husband," she says, and the casual endearment feels like a blade between your ribs. "I've been thinking about the agricultural problems in Thessaly. If we adjust the seasonal patterns slightly and redirect some of the river flows." She launches into one of her typical brilliant analyses, completely unaware that this will be the last morning she'll ever greet you as an equal. You listen with half your attention while the other half catalogs everything you're about to lose. Her voice carries that particular musical quality that develops when intelligent people become excited about solving complex problems. Her hands move expressively as she talks, sketching invisible diagrams in the air to illustrate her points. Most importantly, her eyes light up with the kind of pure intellectual joy that's become as essential to your happiness as ambrosia or worship. Ancient Mediterranean cultures had various rituals for marking significant transitions: birth ceremonies, coming-of-age rites, funeral observances that helped communities process major changes. But there's no established protocol for deliberately erasing someone you love from existence. No traditional prayers or ceremonial preparations that might ease the psychological weight of what you're contemplating. Zeus? Metis pauses in her explanation, noticing your distraction. You're not listening. What's wrong? The direct question forces you to meet her eyes, and for a moment, you almost abandon the entire plan. The prophecy might be wrong after all. Oracles occasionally misinterpret their visions, and cosmic fate isn't always as rigid as it appears. Perhaps you could find some other solution, some clever workaround that would satisfy destiny while preserving your marriage. But then you remember your father's fate and your grandfather's before him, and the inexorable pattern of divine succession that has governed cosmic politics since the beginning of time. Every previous generation of gods convinced themselves they could break the cycle, and every generation discovered that prophecy has a way of asserting itself, regardless of precautions. Nothing's wrong, you lie, summoning the kind of reassuring smile that divine authority makes effortlessly convincing. I was just thinking about implementation details. You know how I am with the practical aspects of governance. She laughs, accepting the explanation, because she has no reason to suspect deception from someone who has never betrayed her trust before. Leave the details to me, then. That's what I'm here for. That's what she's here for. The phrase echoes in your mind as you prepare to ensure she'll never be here for anything ever again. Metis exists, in her own understanding, as your partner and advisor, someone whose purpose is to help you rule wisely and well. You're about to transform her into something entirely different, a source of internal wisdom that serves your needs without possessing independent existence. The transformation requires delicate timing and precise control over your divine nature. You begin by expanding your essential form, becoming larger and more diffuse, while maintaining enough coherence to contain another consciousness. The process feels like deliberately inducing cosmic vertigo, stretching your awareness until it encompasses spaces large enough to hold a tightness without crushing her divine essence. Metis notices something's happening when the air around you begins to shimmer with barely contained power. But by then it's too late for questions or resistance. You move with the speed of lightning striking, opening yourself like a cosmic mouth and drawing her into the space that you've created within your own being. The absorption happens quickly, faster than thought, faster than regret, certainly faster than any last words or final recognitions. One moment, Metis exists as a separate entity, with her own thoughts and desires and opinions about the Thessalian agriculture. The next moment, she's become part of you, her consciousness integrated into yours in ways that feel both intimate and violating. The silence afterward is deafening. Your chambers, which moments ago contained two immortal beings discussing policy matters, now hold only you and the terrible knowledge of what you've done. Metis' physical form has vanished entirely, leaving behind only subtle changes in your own awareness. New depths of understanding, enhanced strategic thinking, and the constant presence of another mind that thinks alongside yours whether you want it to or not. Historians still argue whether this mythological episode represents ancient anxieties about consuming female wisdom or philosophical speculation about the unity of knowledge and power. But living through it teaches you something that scholarly analysis misses: the difference between possessing wisdom and being possessed by it. The immediate aftermath of swallowing Metis reveals the fundamental flaw in your carefully calculated plan. You assumed that absorbing her would give you control over her wisdom, but consciousness doesn't work that way, even divine consciousness. Instead of gaining a useful internal advisor, you've created something far more complicated. A second mind that shares your skull, but maintains its own opinions, memories, and increasingly pointed observations about your recent behavior. Metis doesn't disappear into some convenient mental filing system where you can access her strategic insights on demand. She remains herself, fully aware and deeply unimpressed with your solution to the prophecy problem. Her voice echoes in your thoughts with the kind of relentless clarity that made her such an effective counselor when she existed outside your head, except now there's no escape from her commentary. This is your idea of wise leadership? Her her internal voice inquires with devastating politeness, eliminating anyone who might pose a theoretical future threat. I'm curious about your long-term strategy here, husband. Do you plan to swallow every potential rival until Olympus is just you talking to yourself? The sarcasm burns worse than any external criticism because it comes with the intimate knowledge of your deepest insecurities and motivations. External critics can only guess at your psychological weaknesses. Metis knows them all, has observed them develop over centuries of marriage, and can deploy them with surgical precision. Sleep becomes even more elusive than before, partly because gods don't technically require rest, but mostly because your internal passenger has strong opinions about your sleeping habits and isn't shy about sharing them. Every time you close your eyes, you hear her analyzing your decisions, questioning your judgments, and generally providing the kind of unwanted wisdom that you supposedly acquired her to access. Ancient sources describe Zeus as the epitome of divine authority, the ultimate patriarch whose word becomes cosmic law. But they don't mention the psychological toll of literally internalizing dissent. Every pronouncement you make now comes with immediate internal commentary about its wisdom or lack thereof. Every decision faces instant review by someone who knows your weaknesses better than you know them yourself. The other gods notice changes in your behavior almost immediately, though they misinterpret the cause in ways that would be amusing if your situation weren't so psychologically torturous. Hera assumes you're having second thoughts about your marriage to Metis, and begins dropping subtle hints about her own availability. Apollo suggests you might benefit from music therapy. Dionysus offers wine that he promises will help with whatever's clearly troubling you. Nobody suspects that you've committed what amounts to divine murder-suicide, creating a situation where the victim continues to exist as an unwilling participant in their killer's mental processes. The crime is too bizarre for anyone to imagine, let alone investigate. Meanwhile, the child, your unborn son who prompted this entire catastrophe, continues developing within Metis, who remains pregnant despite her current status as a component of your consciousness. The biological processes continue independently of the metaphysical complications you've created, meaning that you're essentially gestating your own prophesied replacement while carrying on conversations with his mother about your obvious psychological problems. You realize this solves nothing, Métis points out during one particularly sleepless night when divine insomnia has you pacing your chambers like a caged thunderstorm. The child will still be born. He'll still inherit both our natures. The only difference is that now his birth will be even more dramatic and symbolically significant than if you just let things proceed naturally. The accuracy of her analysis is infuriating precisely because you can't argue with it. Your attempt to prevent the prophecy has simply delayed its fulfillment, while ensuring that when it does occur, the circumstances will be even more cosmically significant than originally predicted. The headaches begin around the third month of this arrangement, starting as mild discomfort and escalating into divine agony that makes your previous experiences with cosmic suffering look like minor inconveniences. It feels like someone's hammering inside your skull, which you gradually realize is exactly what's happening. Metis isn't just pregnant, she's actively preparing for childbirth in the only space available to her, which happens to be the inside of your head. With her typical methodical approach to complex problems, she's begun crafting armor and weapons for the child, using her divine skills as a tightness of wisdom and craftsmanship to ensure that your son will be properly equipped for whatever fate awaits him. The rhythmic pounding of divine smithwork echoes through your thoughts day and night, accompanied by Metis' running commentary on the irony of your situation. You wanted to control wisdom, she observes while hammering out what sounds like a helmet. But wisdom can't be controlled, only partnered with. Now you're learning that lesson the hard way. The hammering intensifies with each passing week, transforming from annoying background noise into a cosmic percussion section that threatens to crack your divine skull like an overripe pomegranate. The irony isn't lost on you, or on Metis, who takes every opportunity to point it out, that your attempt to control wisdom has resulted in the least wise situation imaginable, hosting an internal blacksmith shop while trying to maintain the dignity of cosmic rulership. Ancient sources describe divine headaches as metaphorical expressions of intellectual struggle, but they clearly never experienced the literal reality of having someone forge armor inside their cranium. Each strike of Métis's hammer reverberates through your consciousness like thunder echoing in a mountain cave, making coherent thought nearly impossible and rational decision-making completely out of the question. The other Olympians begin to avoid you entirely, partly because your obvious distress makes them uncomfortable, but mostly because you've started having conversations with yourself that sound increasingly like arguments between two different people occupying the same body. Hermes, never one to miss an opportunity for gossip, spreads rumors about your mental state that range from divine madness to early-onset cosmic dementia. Perhaps, Métis suggests during a particularly brutal smithing session, you could ask Hephaestus for assistance, professional courtesy between craftspeople and all that. The suggestion horrifies you initially. Admitting to your fellow gods that you need help with a headache seems like the kind of weakness that undermines divine authority. But as the weeks pass and the internal metalworking shows no signs of stopping, desperate times begin to call for desperate measures. Hephaestus arrives at your palace with the awkward enthusiasm of someone who rarely gets invited to social events, carrying his toolkit and wearing the kind of expression that suggests he's both honored and confused by your summons. He's the divine blacksmith, after all. If anyone can understand the mechanics of cosmic craftsmanship, it's the god who forges lightning bolts for your personal use. Interesting problem. He observes after you explain the situation with as much dignity as possible, while divine hammering provides percussive accompaniment to your words. Internal pressure from expanding consciousness, complicated by active metalworking in confined spaces. I've seen similar issues in mortal smithies, though obviously not on quite this scale. His professional assessment of your supernatural predicament would be reassuring if it weren't accompanied by the kind of thoughtful frowning that suggests the solution might be more drastic than you prefer. Hephaestus has always been pragmatic about his craft. When something needs to be fixed, he fixes it efficiently and permanently, regardless of aesthetic concerns or psychological comfort. The cleanest solution, he continues, hefting his favorite axe with the casual confidence of someone who has split many things that seemed unsplittable, is direct intervention. One precise strike should relieve the pressure and allow whatever's developing in there to emerge naturally. The phrase, "split your head open," sounds significantly more alarming when proposed as an actual medical procedure rather than a figure of speech. But the alternative, months more of internal blacksmithing while your unborn son develops into whatever cosmic force the prophecy predicted, seems even worse. Historians still argue whether this mythological episode represents ancient understanding of difficult childbirth, primitive surgical techniques, or metaphorical descriptions of intellectual breakthrough. But from your perspective, the academic interpretation matters less than the immediate reality of divine pain that's threatening to drive you completely insane. You position yourself carefully, trying to maintain whatever dignity is possible when preparing to have your skull split open by a fellow god wielding an axe. Hephaestus measures the angle with professional precision, calculating the exact point that will relieve pressure without causing unnecessary damage to your essential divine nature. "Ready?" he asks. And before you can reconsider the entire plan, his axe descends with the kind of perfect accuracy that comes from millennia of practice splitting difficult materials. The crack echoes across Olympus like the sound of a mountain breaking, followed by a moment of silence so complete that even the mortal world seems to pause in anticipation. Then, from the split in your skull, light begins to emerge. Not ordinary illumination, but the kind of pure radiance that suggests something extraordinary is about to enter the world. What emerges isn't a helpless infant requiring years of careful nurturing, but a fully grown goddess, armored in gold and silver, carrying a spear that gleams with its own internal light and wearing an expression of alert intelligence that immediately identifies her as Métis's daughter. She doesn't cry or stumble or show any signs of vulnerability. Instead, she stands poised and ready, as if she's been waiting for this moment of emergence to begin whatever cosmic purpose brought her into existence. This is Athena, born from wisdom and conflict, carrying both her mother's intelligence and your authority, destined to become something that neither parent could have anticipated or controlled. The silence that follows Athena's emergence stretches across Olympus like the moment between lightning and thunder, pregnant with implications that will reshape divine politics for millennia to come. You stand there with a splitting headache, literally, watching your fully grown daughter examine her surroundings with the kind of methodical attention that immediately marks her as Metis' child, while also radiating the kind of natural authority that clearly identifies her as yours. She doesn't speak immediately, which somehow makes her presence even more unnerving. Most newborn gods announce themselves with dramatic proclamations or displays of power designed to establish their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Athena simply observes, taking mental notes about everything from the architectural details of your palace to the expressions on the faces of the other Olympians who have gathered to witness this unprecedented birth. The other gods maintain respectful distance, uncertain how to react to someone who emerged from your head wearing full battle armor and carrying weapons that clearly weren't crafted by any earthly smith. Hephaestus looks particularly impressed with the quality of her equipment, though he seems puzzled about when and where such magnificent pieces could have been forged without his knowledge. Ancient sources describe Athena's birth as a moment of cosmic celebration, but they tend to gloss over the practical awkwardness of suddenly having a fully grown daughter who possesses all your memories of recent events, including your decision to swallow her mother. The look she gives you carries the kind of complex understanding that suggests she knows exactly what happened and has already formed some very definite opinions about your choices. "Father," she says finally, and her voice carries harmonics that resonate through dimensions you didn't know existed. It's neither warm nor cold, neither accusatory nor forgiving, just a statement of biological fact delivered with the kind of precision that makes every word feel significant. Metis' voice, which has been your constant internal companion for months, goes quiet for the first time since the swallowing incident. The sudden silence in your head feels almost as disorienting as the previous constant commentary, leaving you uncertain whether her consciousness has transferred to Athena or simply decided that direct communication is no longer necessary. The prophecy that started this entire catastrophe hovers unspoken in the air like incense smoke. Here stands your child, born of wisdom and thunder, clearly possessing both intelligence and power, in measures that would concern any parent worried about eventual overthrow. But something about her demeanor suggests that traditional patterns of divine succession might not apply in this case. "I have no interest in your throne," Athena observes, as if reading your thoughts, which, given her unusual birth circumstances, she very well might be able to do. "Power without purpose is merely noise. I prefer influence to authority, strategy to force." Her statement should be reassuring, but it carries undertones that make you suspect she understands power dynamics better than most of your fellow Olympians who have spent centuries maneuvering for advantage. Someone who genuinely doesn't want political control might be far more dangerous than someone whose ambitions you can predict and counter. Historians still argue whether Athena represents ancient memories of powerful priestesses, philosophical ideals about the relationship between wisdom and warfare, or simple mythological wish fulfillment about perfect daughters who don't challenge paternal authority. But watching her examine the cosmic order with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes, you suspect that academic categories might be inadequate for classifying what you've inadvertently created. The assembled Olympians gradually find their voices, offering congratulations and welcomes that carry the careful politeness of people who aren't sure whether they're greeting a new ally or a potential threat. Hera's smile has the brittle quality that suggests she's already calculating how this development affects her own position as queen of the gods. Apollo and Artemis exchange glances that indicate they're wondering whether divine sibling dynamics will require adjustment now that they're no longer the newest members of the pantheon. Athena acknowledges each greeting with perfect courtesy, but her attention keeps returning to you with an intensity that makes you increasingly uncomfortable. It's the look of someone solving a complex problem, and you have the unsettling suspicion that you're the problem being solved. "We should talk," she says quietly, in the tone that parents everywhere recognize as code for serious conversation about your recent life choices. Privately. The other gods take the hint and disperse with the kind of tactical retreat that suggests they'd rather not be present for whatever family discussion is about to unfold. Even Hephaestus packs up his tools with unusual haste, clearly preferring the safety of his forge to the potential awkwardness of watching Zeus get lectured by his minutes-old daughter. When you're finally alone with Athena, the weight of everything you've done settles over you like armor made of guilt and regret. She knows about Medes, knows what you did and why you did it, and now you have to face the judgment of someone who inherited both your power and her mother's wisdom. The conversation with Athena that follows her emergence becomes the most psychologically challenging discussion you've ever had, partly because she possesses inherited memories of events she didn't personally witness, and partly because she approaches the entire situation with the kind of analytical detachment that makes emotional manipulation impossible. "Let's establish some facts," she begins, settling onto one of your marble benches with the casual grace of someone who has always existed, rather than someone who emerged from your skull 20 minutes ago. "You married my mother because you needed her intelligence to establish stable cosmic governance. You eliminated her because you feared a prophecy about your eventual overthrow. You believed that absorbing her would give you control over wisdom while preventing your replacement." The clinical summary of your actions sounds even worse when delivered by someone who shares your divine nature, but apparently inherited all of Medes' ethical clarity along with her strategic thinking. Athena doesn't sound angry. Anger would be easier to handle. She sounds disappointed, which hits much harder than rage. "The fundamental error in your reasoning," she continues, "was treating wisdom as a commodity rather than a relationship. You can't possess intelligence the way you possess a thunderbolt or a palace. Wisdom emerges from the interaction between different perspectives, which requires multiple minds working together rather than one mind trying to contain everything." Ancient philosophical traditions that won't develop for centuries would eventually reach similar conclusions about the collaborative nature of knowledge. But hearing these insights from your daughter while the headache from her birth still throbs behind your eyes creates a surreal educational experience that no divine parent should have to endure. You want to defend your choices, to explain the cosmic pressures that forced such drastic action. But every justification sounds pathetic when examined through the lens of perfect clarity that Athena brings to the conversation. She's not interested in excuses or rationalizations. She wants to understand the decision-making process that led to such a spectacular failure of judgment. "The prophecy still stands, you realize," she observes with the gentle patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student. "I am indeed your child born of wisdom and thunder. The question is whether I represent the fulfillment of that prediction or the beginning of something entirely different." The casual reference to your potential overthrow should terrify you, but something about her tone suggests that traditional patterns of divine succession might not apply in this case. She doesn't speak like someone planning a coup. She speaks like someone genuinely puzzled by the whole concept of violent power transfer. "What do you want?" you ask, realizing as the words leave your mouth that this might be the first time you've ever asked that question of another divine being without calculating how to use their answer for your own advantage. Athena considers the question with the kind of thoughtful pause that suggests she's formulating a response that will be both honest and strategically useful. "I want to solve problems that matter. I want to build things that last. I want to use power in ways that create more wisdom, rather than simply accumulating more authority." Her goals sound admirable in theory, but they also represent a fundamental challenge to the way Olympian politics has operated since you overthrew the Titans. Most gods pursue power for its own sake, treat wisdom as a tool for achieving dominance, and measure success by their ability to impose their will on others. Athena seems to be proposing something radically different: power as a means of enabling collaborative problem-solving rather than individual aggrandizement. Historians still argue whether the Athena myths represent ancient Greek ideals about philosopher-rulers, feminist reinterpretations of patriarchal authority, or simply wishful thinking about what divine governance might look like if gods actually cared about cosmic welfare rather than personal glory. But talking with her directly, you begin to suspect that all these academic interpretations miss something essential about her nature. She isn't interested in replacing you, because replacement implies continuation of the same basic system with different personnel. What she represents is the possibility of transformation, not just changing who holds power, but changing what power means and how it operates. "I propose a partnership," she says finally, "but not the kind you had with my mother. Not marriage or political alliance, or any relationship based on mutual dependency. Something more like collaborative consultation. You handle the aspects of cosmic governance that require authority and force. I handle the aspects that require strategy and wisdom. Neither of us tries to control the other." The suggestion should appeal to you. It offers a way to benefit from Métis's intelligence without the psychological complications of internal voices or the political risks of shared authority. But something about Athena's proposal makes you suspect that accepting it would change you in ways you can't predict or control. The partnership with Athena develops over the following months into something unprecedented in the history of divine governance. A working relationship based on mutual respect rather than fear, manipulation, or cosmic hierarchy. She doesn't defer to your authority the way other Olympians do, but she also doesn't challenge it in the traditional ways that usually lead to divine conflict. Instead, she simply ignores the political aspects of power entirely and focuses on solving whatever problems require attention. This approach proves both refreshing and deeply unsettling for someone accustomed to operating within frameworks of dominance and submission. When Athena disagrees with your decisions, she doesn't plot rebellion or sulk dramatically. She presents alternative analyses with the kind of logical clarity that makes opposition impossible to dismiss. When she supports your choices, you know it's because she genuinely believes they're wise, rather than because she fears the consequences of dissent. The other Olympians watch this new dynamic with fascination and concern, uncertain how to interpret a relationship that doesn't fit any established categories of divine interaction. Hera assumes you're grooming Athena as your successor and begins cultivating her favor accordingly. Ares interprets her influence as a threat to his position as god of war, and starts looking for opportunities to demonstrate that strategy can't replace raw courage. Apollo and Artemis seem genuinely impressed by their half-sister's intelligence, but remain wary of getting too close to someone whose birth circumstances were so dramatically unusual. Ancient sources describe Athena as Zeus's favorite child, but they typically frame this favoritism in terms of paternal pride rather than genuine partnership. Living through the actual relationship, you discover that favoritism isn't quite the right concept. It's more like finding the one family member whose company you genuinely enjoy, rather than simply tolerate out of cosmic obligation. The first major test of your collaboration comes when mortals begin developing new forms of technology that threaten to upset the careful balance between divine and human capabilities. Prometheus has been sharing fire with humanity despite explicit prohibitions, and various mortal inventors are making disturbing progress toward achievements that were supposed to remain exclusively divine prerogatives. Traditional Olympian response to such challenges typically involves swift, dramatic punishment, designed to remind mortals of their proper place in the cosmic hierarchy. You could send plagues, natural disasters, or simply appear in terrifying glory to crush any human presumption. But Athena suggests a different approach: guidance rather than punishment, education rather than intimidation. Fear-based compliance, she points out during one of your strategic discussions, produces temporary obedience but long-term resentment. If we want stable relationships with mortals, we need to give them reasons to cooperate voluntarily, rather than simply making resistance impossible. Her analysis makes logical sense, but it also represents a fundamental shift away from divine governance principles that have worked for millennia. The idea of treating mortals as junior partners rather than subjects requires rethinking everything from worship practices to divine intervention policies. The experimental approach begins with small gestures, teaching selected humans about agriculture, architecture, and basic craftsmanship, rather than simply demanding sacrifice and adoration. Athena takes personal interest in these educational projects, appearing to mortals not as an awesome and terrible deity, but as a teacher whose lessons come with practical benefits. Historians still argue whether the classical Greek emphasis on wisdom and learning reflects actual divine intervention or represents later philosophical developments projected backward onto mythological narratives. But watching Athena work directly with human students gives you unprecedented insight into the potential for productive collaboration between immortal and mortal intelligence. The results exceed your most optimistic expectations. Mortal communities that receive Athena's guidance develop more sophisticated technologies, more just legal systems, and more effective methods of conflict resolution. Rather than threatening divine authority, their enhanced capabilities seem to create new opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation. But success brings its own complications. Other gods begin requesting similar educational relationships with mortals, not all of them sharing Athena's commitment to wisdom over power. Aphrodite wants to teach humans about love in ways that would probably destabilize most existing marriages. Dionysus has ideas about sharing divine revelry that would likely result in civilization-ending parties. Even well-intentioned deities like Demeter might cause problems if their mortal students gain too much control over agricultural processes. We need guidelines, Athena observes during one particularly complex discussion about divine intervention policies. Not rigid rules that prevent all innovation, but flexible principles that encourage beneficial cooperation while preventing cosmic disasters. The phrase cosmic disasters sounds like hyperbole until you consider what might happen if gods start competing for mortal attention by offering increasingly powerful gifts without regard for long-term consequences. Divine rivalry has already proven destructive enough when limited to Olympian politics. Extending such competition to the mortal realm could have catastrophic results. The establishment of what will eventually become known as the Athenian Protocols, guidelines for divine mortal interaction that prioritize wisdom over spectacle, represents your first major collaborative achievement and proves surprisingly popular among the more thoughtful Olympians. Even gods who initially resisted the idea of structured divine intervention eventually recognized the benefits of avoiding the kind of chaotic competition that could destabilize both realms. But your partnership with Athena faces its most serious test when she decides to involve herself directly in mortal affairs, not through intermediaries or selected students, but by establishing an ongoing relationship with an entire city-state. The proposal sounds reasonable in theory. Athens needs a patron deity. Athena needs a practical laboratory for testing her ideas about wisdom-based governance. But the implications make you profoundly nervous. Ancient Mediterranean religious practices typically involved gods maintaining careful distance from daily mortal politics, offering blessings or punishments in response to worship and sacrifice, but avoiding direct involvement in human decision-making processes. What Athena proposes represents something unprecedented. A deity serving essentially as a permanent advisor to mortal rulers, guiding their choices while allowing them to maintain nominal authority. The risk, you point out during one of your increasingly frequent strategic discussions, is that mortals will begin expecting all gods to provide such detailed guidance. If one city receives constant divine counsel, others will demand equal treatment, and we'll find ourselves managing every aspect of human civilization. Athena's response demonstrates the kind of logical precision that makes arguing with her both intellectually stimulating and emotionally exhausting. The greater risk is that mortals will develop their own wisdom traditions without divine input, potentially creating philosophical systems that exclude us entirely. Better to guide that development than to lose influence through neglect. Her analysis proves remarkably prescient, though you won't fully appreciate its accuracy until centuries later, when various human philosophers begin developing rational systems that treat divine intervention as unnecessary superstition rather than cosmic reality. The Athens experiment begins modestly, with Athena appearing to selected leaders during moments of particularly difficult decision-making, offering insights that help them navigate complex political situations more effectively. She doesn't impose solutions or demand specific outcomes. Instead, she provides analytical frameworks that enable mortals to reach better conclusions independently. The results are impressive enough to attract attention from other city-states who begin requesting similar divine partnerships. Some gods eagerly embrace these opportunities for expanded influence, while others resist involvement in mortal politics as beneath their dignity. The mixed response creates exactly the kind of competitive tension that your intervention guidelines were designed to prevent. Poseidon, predictably, decides that if Athena can have a city, he deserves one too, preferably Athens, which he claims by right of having provided the original spring that made the location habitable. His challenge forces the kind of direct divine competition that you hoped to avoid, complete with public demonstrations of power and formal judging by mortal representatives. The contest becomes legendary, Poseidon striking the earth to produce his saltwater spring, Athena planting the olive tree that will become symbol and sustenance for generations of Athenians. But from your perspective as supreme divine authority, the real significance lies in the precedent being established. Gods competing for mortal loyalty through beneficial gifts rather than threats of punishment. The mortals choose Athena, obviously. Olive trees provide food, oil, and wood, while saltwater springs are impressive, but not particularly useful for daily life. But Poseidon's gracious acceptance of defeat surprises everyone, including himself. Rather than retaliating against the humans who rejected him, he acknowledges the wisdom of their choice and offers to serve as Athens' naval protector alongside Athena's terrestrial guidance. Historians still argue whether this mythological contest represents actual religious rivalry between different cult traditions, or serves as allegorical explanation for Athens' eventual dominance in both wisdom and maritime power. But witnessing the competition directly gives you insight into how divine cooperation might work when properly managed through wisdom rather than simply imposed through authority. The success of the Athens model inspires similar experiments elsewhere, though with mixed results. Some gods prove naturally gifted at collaborative guidance, while others struggle with the patience required for mortal education. A few attempts end in disaster when deities become too invested in their chosen city's success, and begin treating rival communities as personal enemies rather than simply different experimental approaches. But the overall trend toward partnership rather than domination represents a fundamental shift in divine-mortal relations that will reshape both realms in ways you're still learning to understand. Athena's influence extends far beyond her original proposal for collaborative consultation. She's essentially redesigned the basic operating principles of cosmic governance. The centuries that follow the establishment of these new divine mortal partnerships unfold like a vast tapestry woven from threads of wisdom, ambition, and the occasional spectacular mistake. You watch from Olympus as human civilization develops in directions that would have been impossible under the old system of purely authoritarian divine rule, while simultaneously learning that collaboration brings its own unique challenges and unexpected rewards. Athena's influence spreads far beyond Athens, carried by travelers, traders, and scholars who encounter her wisdom-based approach to governance and adapt it to their own circumstances. Her teachings about the importance of rational deliberation, evidence-based decision-making, and collaborative problem-solving become foundational principles for what will eventually develop into democratic institutions, philosophical schools, and scientific methodologies. But success breeds its own complications, and you discover that managing a pantheon of increasingly independent-minded gods requires skills that centuries of authoritarian rule didn't teach you. When Athena suggests that divine authority should be earned through wisdom rather than inherited through power, Her fellow Olympians listen with the kind of attention that makes you suspect they're considering applications to their own domains. The transformation isn't always smooth. Ares struggles with the concept that strategic intelligence might be more valuable than raw courage, leading to several unfortunate incidents where his attempts at wisdom-based warfare result in overthinking relatively simple military problems. Aphrodite discovers that teaching mortals about healthy relationships is significantly more complex than simply inspiring passion, especially when her students start asking difficult questions about consent and emotional manipulation. Ancient sources describe this period as a golden age of divine-mortal cooperation, but they tend to gloss over the practical difficulties of coordinating multiple gods who are all experimenting with new approaches to their traditional responsibilities. Your role evolves from Supreme Commander to something more like Cosmic Project Manager, spending most of your time mediating disputes between deities who have very different ideas about what wisdom-based governance means in practice. Athena, meanwhile, continues developing her relationship with Athens in ways that exceed even your most optimistic projections. The city becomes a center of learning that attracts students from across the Mediterranean, producing innovations in art, philosophy, mathematics, and architecture that will influence human civilization for millennia. Her temple, the Parthenon, represents not just architectural achievement, but a new model for how divine worship can inspire rather than simply demand. The success of Athens inspires other cities to seek similar divine partnerships, leading to what historians will later call the classical period, an era when human achievement reaches unprecedented heights, partly because gods learn to guide rather than simply rule. But you also notice troubling signs that mortals are becoming less dependent on divine intervention for solving their problems, developing their own philosophical and scientific traditions that sometimes question the necessity of divine involvement entirely. They're growing up, Athena observes during one of your evening discussions, watching the lights of various human cities twinkling across the Mediterranean landscape. Isn't that what good parents want for their children? Her analogy makes you profoundly uncomfortable, partly because it implies that divine authority is temporary rather than eternal, but mostly because you suspect she might be right. The mortals who benefit from wisdom-based divine guidance don't become more dependent on gods. They become more capable of independent thought and self-governance. The ultimate irony of your collaboration with Athena reveals itself gradually over the centuries. By learning to rule wisely, you've created conditions that make traditional divine rule unnecessary. Mortals who understand rational decision-making, evidence-based analysis, and collaborative problem-solving don't need gods to tell them how to live. They need examples of wisdom in action and occasional guidance when facing truly unprecedented challenges. But perhaps that's not actually a failure of divine authority. Perhaps it's the fulfillment of what divine authority was always supposed to accomplish. Instead of creating eternal dependency, wise leadership produces capable independence. Instead of demanding perpetual worship, effective guidance inspires grateful partnership. As you stand on your balcony overlooking the mortal world, watching cities full of humans who have learned to solve their own problems while still honoring the gods who taught them how, you realize that Athena has accomplished something extraordinary. She's transformed the prophecy about your overthrow into a prediction about your transformation. You're still king of the gods, still wielder of thunder, still supreme divine authority, but you're also something you never expected to become. A father who's proud of his daughter's achievements, and a ruler who's learned that true power lies not in controlling others, but in enabling them to become their best selves. The wind grows softer now, carrying with it the scent of olive groves and the distant sound of waves against ancient shores. These stories of gods and mortals, of power and wisdom, of love and loss, fade gently into the realm of dreams where all mythologies eventually rest. Whether these tales speak of actual divine beings or represent humanity's deepest understanding of our own nature matters less than the truths they reveal about courage, choice, and the eternal dance between fate and free will. Let these ancient voices whisper you toward peaceful sleep, where wisdom becomes intuition, and all the struggles of consciousness dissolve into the deeper rhythms of rest. Sweet dreams.